For today's video, it's going to be pretty short and sweet. We're going to take this Optane drive and we're going to install it in an AMD system. A lot of you already know this is possible, but for some reason some of you think because this is Intel technology that you can't mix Intel and AMD technology. It's like mixing fire and ice or oil and water, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Let's take a look, let's discuss. Getting a single Optane drive working on an AMD platform is pretty easy. It's basically plug and play. You can use an adapter cable like this, or you can use a PCIe add-in card. PCIe add-in card, I would really only recommend if you're going to go with a Threadripper platform. I'm demonstrating this on a Threadripper platform, but this would work just as well on an AM4 or AM5 platform, at least when we're talking about 1 or 2 Optane devices. If you're going to add like 4 or 6 or 8, you're going to want more PCIe lanes, which you're going to be relegated to Threadripper for that. This also applies not just to Optane, but also any kind of enterprise U.2 storage, because U.2 is basically NVMe, it's PCIe, and because it's just PCIe, you just got to get the lanes from the connector on the drive to the motherboard somehow. It can be a PCIe add-in card that goes from PCIe to Oculink or PCIe to MCIO, as I recently demonstrated, or PCIe to some other connector and then some other connector to your U.2 interface. Heck, you may be able to get U.3 on eBay really cheap, something like that. The other piece of advice I would give you is that when you're looking for these kinds of cables, so like this Intel cable is low profile. Intel used to sell these for $25 if it didn't come bundled with the drive. A lot of the time it would come bundled with the drive, but what is being sold now doesn't come bundled with these cables. This is only capable of Gen 3 PCI Express. There's Gen 3, Gen 4, and now even Gen 5 cables like this. The Gen 4 and the Gen 5 cables are breathtakingly more expensive. So I don't even know if you can get these for about $25 anymore. It seems like it's going to be a little bit more pricey than that. An alternative could be something from ICDock. We've reviewed ICDock stuff in the past. Depending on what sort of situation that you're facing, you may have to come to the Level 1 forums for a little bit of tech support and help. But using these U.2 drives on any modern platform, you know, an AM4, AM5, AMD's platform, Intel's platform, obviously doesn't really matter. This will work because it's just PCI Express. It's just a matter of getting it into the motherboard. Even if you don't have an M.2 slot, you can use a PCIe card like this one. This takes X4. This actually does have a redriver on it because this is actually a Gen 4 capable card, but you can go out into, this is more Optane, but this is a P5800X. So there are Gen 4 Optanes that will absolutely saturate the 4 Gen 4 links. This Optane is even lower latency, well, slightly. That's just because of the controller and software improvements, not the media. But also, it's Gen 4, which means that it'll saturate Gen 4 speeds. You can get 8 gigabytes per second off of this one drive. So a RAID 0 of these drives, ooh, that's pretty nice. But even I'm not crazy enough to have bought 3 terabytes of P5800X level Optane. But I am crazy enough to have bought several of these off of Newegg. And in fact, I've actually bought several more of these for other YouTubers and other folks in my circle because $400 for storage like this really is a good deal. The benefit of Optane is that it has very, very low I/O latency. And what that means is single block requests. I recently did another video where I talked a little bit about I/O latency. Most of the time, when you're just using your computer interactively, the I/O pattern is unpredictable. And so when you are using a program, it's asking for basically 1 or 2 blocks at a time from storage. And the contents of those blocks determine the next blocks that you're going to need to request. And so really the bottleneck, the thing that dominates that equation is the round trip time from software execution to the drive. And then the drive returns the data and then the software says, okay, I need the next thing. And so the processing time to process the data is minuscule. It's almost instantaneous. But the time that it takes the drive to look up and return that record is the thing that takes forever. And this is about twice as fast as this, or I should say the latency of this is about half NAND flash. even for old Gen 1 Optane devices. And Gen 1 Optane devices, 1.5 terabytes, about $400 right now on Newegg. That is a heck of a deal for what the underlying technology is, especially as we enter 2024. And a lot of analysts are predicting a storage apocalypse for a NAND because the production rate for NAND has been down for so long that the price can't help but go way, way up, like 50% up, 100% up, maybe. Something like that. And again, $400 for 1.5 terabytes. It doesn't seem like a good deal if you're just looking at it for the raw capacity, but it has dramatically much higher wear endurance and dramatically lower latency. Depending on what you're doing, you may feel a huge difference in latency. For everything that I do, I sort of have to live on a computer like 10 hours a day, just doing goof off stuff like this and also real work and everything else. And, it makes a big difference for what I do. Anyway, using Optane on AMD, it works just as well on Intel. There's a minor asterisk there, as it does on any other platform, because it's just a PCIe device. So once you've got the device adapted, you can come over to your interface. I would say it's also only necessary to use this if you're going to do it on a boot volume, because you can just do it through the GUI. Like you can install the drivers in Windows and set up your RAID volume through the GUI if it's not your boot volume. If it's your boot volume, we've got to go through all this to set it up and then set up our Windows USB. So we begin our quest to install Windows on a RAID volume by creating a Windows USB. I'm assuming that you don't need to know how to do that. There are other guides for that. Windows USB. We're going to reinsert the Windows USB. Now you're going to have to go to the page for your motherboard and go to support. Download. And there's two downloads that we need. One is called RAID Expert Utility version blah blah blah. And inside it is the guide PDF. And the guide PDF is actually quite good. Very well done, AMD. This has everything you need to know. Now, it talks about copying something out of here that is the RAID driver. ASRock doesn't package that in the zip file. I think they probably should. Buy WinRare. Not on this machine. This machine's going to get nuked. Strangely, ASRock calls it the SATA floppy image, but the clue is in the version 9.3.2.255. Hey, that's the same as the RAID Expert Utility. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have anything to do with, just don't worry about it. SATA floppy, it's a terrible name. But inside there's NVMe DID, and then you got three drivers, bottom, config, and RAID. When we go into the Windows installer, we're going to have to install these. Well, at least two out of the three of these in order to get the volume to be detected after we create the RAID BIOS. So what we do is this NVMe DID, we extract to our Windows installer, our installer USB. So that this folder exists in the root of the USB. Once that's done, you're going to take that USB stick and go to the computer that you're going to install, which is, I'm going to switch inputs here, the fancy pants level 1 text KVM, and then we'll be at a raw motherboard with just two empty Optane drives. But one second. So for AMD's platform, the AMD RAID solution that AMD offers is a little behind VRock, what Intel offers with VRock. Fortunately, VRock requires a license to use, whereas AMD RAID Expert doesn't. So it's at least got that going for it. The other thing that's weird is AMD's not keeping a super close eye on board partners, so you don't always have a way to actually configure RAID beyond the basics. In fact, I still wouldn't recommend AMD's RAID Expert 2 for anything more complicated than a RAID 1 mirroring your OS or boot drive, or a RAID 10 for speed, where you do mirroring. Or if you really just want to go fast, you could do a RAID 0, but there's a lot of caveats there. It's kind of a two-step process. You'll have to go into storage configuration and NVMe RAID mode and enable that. Then you have to save and exit and then come back into the BIOS again. When you do that in your main menu, you should have a new option called RAID Expert 2 Configuration Utility. This will give you options to do controller management. You can view the controller, you can rescan disks and see what's going on with that. You can do physical disk management to view physical disk properties and confirm, yes, 1.5 terabytes. Now I should have 2 physical 905Ps in there. I'm going to live very dangerously and set up a RAID 0, and that is because this system is backed up like every hour, so it'll be fine. Okay, with both of our P905 Optane 1.5 terabyte drives connected, you go to the RAID Expert 2 utility, make sure that we see 2 NVMe controllers, 2 physical disks, physical disk operations, select physical disk. They're both there. It looks good. You want to unplug any storage in the system that you're not going to use in the array if there is any storage. And even though this is not part of an array and these are brand new drives, it wants us to delete the fact that they are standalone. So now I can go to create array. And so you can create a RAID 0, a RAID 1, or a volume. So volume is a single disk or concatenation of disks, meaning that when it fills one up, it'll just go to the next one. We're going to do RAID 0. By default, the media type will show you both the hard drives, SSDs, and the hard drives. And RAID Expert, you shouldn't be booting off of a hard drive, and so you shouldn't be using this technology for raiding a bootable array. And because you're not raiding a bootable array, you shouldn't be doing it from BIOS. You can do this from inside Windows way more cleanly, way more easily, and way more reliably. And so that's what I say when AMD is not keeping an eye on some of their board partners. Some of their board partners don't expose this interface in the BIOS. And so it's very hard to set up a bootable volume. You can actually do it. You can create the bootable volume on another board and then bring the drives over. As long as RAID Expert 2 is enabled, and as long as the boards are relatively recently the same BIOS version, like you're not going to be able to do this on like a B450 motherboard. But even X570 motherboards with the latest BIOS, you could create the RAID volume there and bring it over. And generally, that will work. I've not had that be 100% reliable because I don't think a lot of people are using this, and so I don't think AMD really tests this super heavily. But as we enter the era of, AMD's basically taking over the universe in the workstation space, this is what we have right now. So we're going to try to use it. Doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. I know a guy that consults. We can see that our array size here is 2.9 thousand megabytes or 2.9 gigabytes, which is about what we expect. 256K cache tag size, which is probably fine. I usually like to make that match the underlying hardware cell size, and I think on the P905 it's 256 kilobytes. So I have some database servers that run the P4800X Optane. It's insanely fast, and those are configured for 256 kilobyte sector sizes. So it's a sort of an interesting situation. So that's why I've set it to 256 kilobytes. It makes sense for this kind of storage, I think. Maybe I forgot to hit save. Total logical array count 0. I didn't get something exactly right when I was showing you what to do. Let's go into array management, create array, RAID level, RAID 0, select physical disks. Yep. Apply changes. Execute, create array. Array 1. Total logical array count 1. Must have just forgot to hit save. Happens to the best of us. Let's save and exit. Let's preemptively go back into BIOS one more time and just double check. Logical array count 1. That's what we want to see. All right, so our initial setup shows the drives separately. Sometimes they don't show up at all. You're not in a good spot right now. It's like, wait a minute, I can see the drives individually. Yeah, not fabulous. So we want to pick the RC RAID driver first. No. I want to go to the folder that we made earlier. There's 3 drivers in here, basically. We'll start with the bottom. The bottom device enables the other device drivers to also be installed. So next we do the RAID driver. And now we see drive 0 unallocated space 2.7 terabytes. Looks nice. All right, so we can just do next from here. That's going to copy the Windows files and get them ready for the installation, and pretty soon we'll be booted into Windows. That's going pretty fast, even though these are Gen 3 drives. 2 Gen 3 by your powers combined. Gen 4 throughput, but with half the latency of normal. Well, I don't know how much latency we're going to lose with the RAID Expert driver overhead, but we're going to find out. Well, that's kind of fast. Now I have to install a bunch of crap. So when I set up a new machine, I like to use Wendell or Chocolatey. It's kind of a Windows package management system. If you're not familiar with the term package management system on Windows, imagine that you could just open up a terminal window and just say, hey, go get Chrome, Firefox, Steam, VLC, WinRAR, 7-Zip, whatever. You just give it a list of programs and we'll just go do it, and there's no BS, and it gets it done. That's Package Manager. We did videos on that. Check those out. Wendell is kind of there, kind of not. Like, Microsoft's in sort of a weird spot. Some bad people figured out how to use the app installer protocol to install malware because it bypasses some checks, because of course it does. But also, like, the people at Microsoft do things that don't make any sense. And I've pointed this out before, but I'm going to keep pointing it out because it's just, it's easy to see the cracks in the Microsoft empire when you actually have to use these things. And so, like, I search app installer, and all of these people have gamed the thing mobile app installer, WSA tools, APK installer. Okay, I guess APK installer, like, is a thing people are looking for, but, like, none of these are real. And some of them say official, like official whatever. I saw that earlier. It's like, here's Microsoft 365 Office installed. Okay, but it's a 3 out of 5 stars because it's some Faustian bargain from Microsoft trying to actually use it. Because, yeah, Windows App Studio installer, this is actually from Microsoft Corporation. This is probably not actually what I need. Use your webcam. Accesses. Okay, that's probably not what I need. And then Edge does that, which is annoying and dumb. So use the Wendell tool to manage and install applications. And then it's like, you can get the app installer from the Microsoft Store. App installer. Isn't that what I just searched for? I literally just searched for app installer. And app installer, when you are in the Microsoft Store and you go to search for app installer, guess what's not there? Like, does anybody at Microsoft? No one at Microsoft is literally using their own product. Am I the one taking crazy pills here? There it is. Also with slightly more than 3 stars. How are you the operating system company on Earth and making mistakes this bad? Like, really? Actually, I guess Linux is probably the largest operating system on Earth. The only place that hasn't completely taken over the universe is desktop. And I suspect that's because of sleeper agents making the desktop experience secretly worse. No. 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 Like, who thought that was a good idea? Also, the start menu while I'm at it. Again, I complained about the start menu in the past. I've clicked on this. What's here? Edge, Solitaire, LinkedIn, recommended app. It's like, okay, there's the Studio installer, which was recently added, but it was not at all a valid result for searching for app installer. WhatsApp, Spotify, Xbox, To Do. This is basically all trash. Let's search for touchscreen controls. Hey, calibrate the screen for pen or touch input. That's going to disappear in the next Windows update. See, right now I can change it. I get this little pop-up, which is actually from Windows 8 for the touch interface. As soon as we do Windows update and reboot, that's going to be gone. Hey, WinGet is there finally. Unfortunately, WinGet is still not sophisticated enough to take more than one program that you want at a time, which is just, again, how is Microsoft so bad at this? Another thing you may be asking yourself is, wait, is he installing stuff from the command line and in the background at the same time? It's like, yes, because Windows as an operating system is so broken, there's not a facility for saying, hey, I'm installing applications right now. Don't actually install more applications another different way. The way that you would have in a package manager in virtually any Linux distro of the last 2 decades. Oh, you can install a program via a shell script while you're also using the package manager. That's perfectly fine. That's kind of what I'm doing on Linux. See, that was kind of bait because, yeah. Could I do a for each PowerShell loop to just run through WinGet for a list of applications? Yes, but that is not as easy nor as sane as WinGet install program 1, program 2, program 3, program 4, the way that it should be. Damn apologist. Now, one thing we're going to have to do manually, because we only added the bottom driver and the RAID driver. There's also a third driver, a RAID config driver. You can add it during the installer. The driver installer will also add it, but it didn't for some reason on this. So I'm going to do browse, and I'm going to go to our installation. I'm going to go back in, and it's RC config. I'm just going to hit open there and there. And it's like, hey, I know what this is. This showed up under other devices, and so I just found have driver, blah, blah, blah. Now I can run the RAID expert utility. It says, please run this application as administrator, but it can see the 2 disks in here, and you can see the RAID array, and you can see the status, and if there's a problem with it, and so on and so forth. Let's run Crystal Disk Mark. Your sequential reads on a RAID 0 array, not fabulous with the default Crystal Disk Mark settings. Now, performance here, R&D 4K Q1 T1, this is very good. This is especially very good for an AMD system. Not bad. Let's do real-world performance and see how that does. Again, the results are very, very good for an NVMe SSD. So real-world performance profile on Crystal Disk Mark. And Crystal Disk Mark is not the end-all, be-all for benchmarks. But the read speed and the write speed, they could be a little bit better. Like on Linux MD, if this is a Linux workstation, you can get a better result from your read speed. Just something about RAID expert, or RAID expert is not doing a deep enough read or something like that. But this is technically QDepth 1. Keep in mind that the underlying drives, there's more than one drive. So QDepth 1 with 2 underlying drives mean that it is actually getting correctly queued across 2 physical disks. So this is good. AMD has made improvements and progress in this driver over the last year. Random 4K, again, QDepth 1, 206 megabytes per second. That is a very impressive result, especially taking into account that your random 4K read time is 19 microseconds. This is a very, very good result. Just keep in mind that the underlying architecture here, it's Optane, so it's insanely fast. And once you get the RAID driver installed, you're off to the races and everything works great. Now, I've shown you that Optane works on AMD's platform, even in a RAID configuration. But if you're going to use it not in a RAID configuration, just as a standalone drive, well, it's just plug and play. All you got to worry about is cabling, either using an M.2 adapter, or if you splash out for the Gen 4 stuff, using a PCIe drive like this, or you can do enterprise drives like our Kioxia CD6. This is also a Gen 4 drive. Now, these drives are not super amazing just for pure client workloads, but if you're constantly shuffling around lots of compressed archives and uncompressing them, like if you've got a whole farm of VMs and virtual machine archives and you're constantly compressing and decompressing virtual machine archive files, and they're 100, 200 gigabytes at a time, something like this will beat the pants off of pretty much any other drive that you would buy for your workstation. They're not tuned for the lowest latency. They're not tuned for the highest throughput. Consumer drives will generally outperform them for maximum performance at throughput and minimum latencies. But a drive like a CD6 as a workhorse drive, dealing with lots and lots of data, shuffling a couple of 100 gigs at a time, it's basically indispensable. And you can use the same kind of approach with these other enterprise class drives. It's just Optane's sort of in a unique position. The P905s at 1.5 terabytes, the only reason we're seeing those is because Intel has tons and tons of NAND storage, and they're coming out in consumer drives instead of enterprise drives, because this is the older generation of NAND. Intel still has second generation NAND, which is insanely way faster. But that doesn't mean that first generation NAND is not also insanely way fast. It also doesn't mean that you have to have an Intel platform to use Optane. It works pretty well here, even under the AMD RAID, which can be a little bit of a handicap when we're talking about latency and maximum throughput as being additive. If you're on Linux, it'll work just as well. You don't need to enable the RAID drivers or anything. You just use Linux MD. You don't fool with AMD RAID expert stuff at all on the Linux side. This is just the Windows stuff. So I'm Wendell. This is Level 1. I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums if you have any questions or I missed anything or anything is unclear. All right. Signing out, and I'll see you there.